A powerful businessman is lured into a dark meeting in an abandoned cellar. What seemed to be a serious accusation turns out to be a cruel trap, planned by his brother and his own children. Betrayed and left to die, a poor 7-year-old girl appears and does the unbelievable. Walter Harrington surveyed Seattle from his penthouse office, 60 stories above the city he'd conquered over 5 decades. Rain tapped against the floor-to-ceiling windows, blurring the Space Needle in the distance. At 72, he still commanded the boardroom of Harrington Foods, the largest supermarket chain in the Pacific Northwest, with the same intensity that had built his empire from a single corner store. "Mr. Harrington?" His assistant's voice crackled through the intercom. "Your brother Russell is here to see you." Walter frowned. His younger brother rarely visited the corporate headquarters. Their relationship had grown increasingly strained over the years, civil in public, cold in private. "Send him in," Walter said, straightening his Italian suit jacket. Russell Harrington entered with a forced smile. 5 years younger than Walter, he carried himself with the stiff posture of a man perpetually measuring himself against an impossible standard. "Quite the view," Russell remarked, gesturing toward the rain-streaked windows. "Always the king on his throne." Walter ignored the barb. "What brings you here, Russell? I thought you were in Portland this week." "Family business," Russell replied, settling into a leather chair without waiting for an invitation. "I've been speaking with your children." Walter's jaw tightened. His 3 children, James, Michael, and Diane, had grown increasingly distant over the years. James, the oldest at 45, had desperately wanted to become CEO years ago, but Walter had denied him, seeing only his son's eagerness for power, not competence. Michael, 42, creative but unfocused, had squandered millions on failed ventures that Walter had reluctantly funded. Diane, 38, perhaps the most capable of the 3, had grown bitter after Walter rejected her proposal to modernize the company's approach. "And what family business would that be?" Walter asked coolly. Russell leaned forward. "There's been a whistleblower, Walter. Someone with documentation about accounting irregularities at the Tacoma Distribution Center. The board doesn't know yet, but it could sink the company." Walter's eyes narrowed. "That's impossible. I review those numbers myself." "The meeting is tonight, an abandoned warehouse near the shipyards. The whistleblower will only meet there, afraid of surveillance here." Russell handed him a slip of paper with an address. "Your children are already involved. If we handle this quietly, we can protect the company." Walter stared at the paper, suspicion mounting. "Why not bring this to me directly? Why involve my children at all?" "Because they're stakeholders too, Walter. You've been keeping them at arm's length for years, making all the decisions. They deserve to be part of this." Walter pocketed the address, his instinct screaming caution, but the mention of accounting irregularities concerned him. A scandal could devastate the company he'd built. "I'll be there," he said finally. 8 o'clock. After Russell left, Walter called his head of security, Thomas Reynolds, a former police detective who had worked for him for 15 years. "Thomas, I need you to look into something discreetly." He explained Russell's visit, the alleged whistleblower. "Sounds suspicious, sir," Thomas replied. "Would you like me to accompany you tonight?" Walter considered it, but shook his head. "No. But stay on standby. I'll call you when the meeting concludes." The rain intensified throughout the afternoon as Walter reviewed quarterly projections. His thoughts drifted to his children. Where had he gone wrong? He had given them everything: private schools, Ivy League educations, positions in the company. Yet instead of gratitude, he sensed only resentment. James had stormed out of his office last month when Walter had refused to sign over control of the company's trust fund for expansion opportunities. "You'll never let go, will you?" James had shouted. "You'd rather see the company stagnate than give any of us real power." Perhaps there was truth in that accusation. Walter had always found it difficult to relinquish control. His own father, a grocery store clerk who died with nothing to his name, had taught him that power, once surrendered, was never regained. At 7:30, Walter left his office, declining his driver's services. He took his own Range Rover, following the GPS to the address Russell had provided. The location was in an industrial district near the waterfront, largely abandoned after shipping operations had moved to newer facilities. The warehouse loomed dark against the night sky, its windows boarded, its brick exterior stained by decades of Pacific Northwest rain. Walter parked, noticing 3 other vehicles already present. He recognized his daughter Diane's Tesla, James's Maserati, and what must be Russell's Mercedes. Inside, the cavernous space was dimly lit by a few hanging work lights. Water dripped from the ceiling, creating puddles on the concrete floor. The air smelled of rust and salt. "Hello?" Walter called, his voice echoing. "Russell? James?" He heard footsteps from the shadows. Russell emerged, followed by Walter's 3 children. None of them smiled in greeting. "Where's this whistleblower?" Walter demanded. Russell checked his watch. "Running late, apparently." Walter noticed how his children positioned themselves, forming a semicircle around him. Diane wouldn't meet his eyes. Michael kept checking his phone nervously. Only James looked directly at him, with an expression Walter had never seen before. A cold calculation that made Walter's skin prickle with alarm. "There is no whistleblower, is there?" Walter said softly. Russell's smile changed, hardened. "Always the smart one, weren't you, Walter? Always one step ahead." "What is this about?" Walter looked from face to face. These people who shared his blood yet stood before him like strangers. "It's about what's rightfully ours," James stepped forward. "You've held onto power too long, Dad. The company, the money, all of it. You've made it clear you'll never willingly hand over control. So you arranged this, what? Ambush? Confrontation." Walter felt a surge of disappointment so profound it manifested as physical pain in his chest. "We're done waiting," Michael added, his voice trembling slightly. "You've shot down every business proposal I've brought you, treated us all like children. You want the company, is that it?" Walter's voice rose. "After everything I've built, everything I've sacrificed." "We want what you promised us," Diane finally spoke, her voice cold. "You always said Harrington Foods would be our legacy, but you've never had any intention of letting us lead." Walter turned to his brother. "And you, Russell? What's your stake in this betrayal?" Russell's face darkened. "How you pushed me out of the company 20 years ago. My company. Father always favored you, and you've been punishing me ever since. These children of yours understand. They know what it's like to live in your shadow." Walter heard a new sound, heavy footsteps approaching from behind. Before he could turn, strong hands gripped his shoulders. 3 men in dark clothing emerged from the shadows. "What is this?" Walter struggled against the grip. "Insurance," Russell explained calmly. "To make sure you listen carefully to our terms." Walter looked at his children, searching for any sign of hesitation, any flicker of the babies he had once held, the teenagers he had taught to drive, the adults whose graduation ceremonies he had proudly attended. He found nothing. "So this is who you've become," he said quietly. Outside, the Seattle rain pounded against the warehouse roof, drowning out the sound of what happened next. The rain had finally stopped when 7-year-old Lily Sullivan made her way down the muddy embankment of Thornton Creek. The small urban waterway cut through northeast Seattle, mostly forgotten except by the neighborhood children who played along its banks and the environmental volunteers who occasionally cleaned it. Lily's sneakers, already worn at the edges and a size too small, sank into the soft earth as she searched for treasures. After school, while waiting for her mother to return from cleaning houses, Lily would collect discarded cans and bottles. Each item represented small change, money that would help with groceries or the ever-increasing rent on their tiny apartment. Her teacher, Ms. Wallace, had called it recycling for the environment when Lily explained her after-school activity, giving it a dignity that made Lily stand taller. But Lily knew the truth. They needed every penny since her father had left 3 years ago. The creek gurgled softly as Lily worked her way along the bank, her small hands already grimy from the day's finds. The afternoon light filtered through the trees, casting dappled shadows on the water. She had just spotted an aluminum can half buried in mud when she saw something else, something that made her drop her collection bag. A man lay crumpled at the water's edge, partially submerged. His expensive suit was torn and muddy, his silver hair matted with blood. For a moment, Lily stood frozen, her heart hammering in her chest. "Mister?" she called timidly. "Are you okay?" When there was no response, Lily inched closer. The man's face was bruised, barely recognizable beneath the swelling and dirt, but she could see his chest rising and falling with shallow breaths. She had never seen anyone so badly hurt before. Lily's first thought was to run for help, but their neighborhood wasn't one where police came quickly, if they came at all. And the man looked like he needed help right away. She remembered what her mother always said. Sometimes the only helping hand you'll find is at the end of your own arm. Mister, Lily tried again, gently touching his shoulder. Can you hear me? The man's eyelids fluttered, and he let out a low groan. His eyes opened slightly. One was swollen nearly shut, revealing a piercing blue gaze that seemed to struggle to focus on her. Help, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the creak. Lily nodded solemnly, accepting the responsibility with the straightforward clarity of childhood. I'll help you. My home isn't far. She knew she couldn't carry him, but perhaps he could walk with support. With determination beyond her years, Lily helped the man sit up, ignoring the way his expensive suit squelched with creek water. My name's Lily, she said, trying to keep her voice steady. What's yours? The man seemed disoriented, touching his head gingerly. Walter, he managed after a moment. Walter Harrington. The name meant nothing to Lily. She didn't watch the business news or read the financial pages. To her, he was simply a hurt person who needed help. Okay, Mr. Harrington, my mom can fix you up. She's good at taking care of people. Can you stand? It took nearly 20 minutes to help Walter to his feet and another 40 to make the journey that normally took Lily 10 minutes. By the time they reached the small rundown apartment building on the edge of the Lake City neighborhood, Walter was leaning heavily on Lily's small frame, his breathing labored. The 3-story building had once been painted blue, but years of Seattle weather had faded it to a dull gray. The stairwell smelled of cooking odors and mildew, and the elevator had an out-of-order sign that had been there since Lily could remember. We're on the 2nd floor, Lily explained apologetically, as Walter eyed the stairs with apprehension. By the time they reached apartment 2C, Walter was barely conscious. Lily fumbled with her key, the one she wore on a string around her neck, and pushed open the door. Mom? She called out, but the apartment was empty. Sarah Sullivan wouldn't be home for another hour at least, still cleaning the sprawling lakeside mansion in Medina, where she worked 3 days a week. The apartment was small, just one bedroom that Sarah and Lily shared, a bathroom with perpetually peeling wallpaper, a kitchenette, and a living area barely large enough for their second-hand sofa and a small television. But it was immaculately clean, with carefully mended curtains and a vase of wildflowers. Lily had picked on her way home from school yesterday. You can lie down here, Lily said, guiding Walter to the sofa. I'll get a washcloth for your face. Walter sank onto the sofa, his tall frame barely fitting its length. Through his pain and disorientation, he registered the contrast between this modest home and his 10,000-square-foot mansion on Mercer Island. Here the furniture was worn but cared for, the decorations sparse but thoughtful. A child's drawings hung in inexpensive frames, photos of Lily at different ages displayed proudly on a small shelf. Lily returned with a damp washcloth and carefully began cleaning the dirt and blood from Walter's face. Her small hands were gentle, her expression concentrated. You're good at this, Walter murmured. Mom taught me, Lily replied with a hint of pride. She says we have to take care of each other because nobody else will. The simple wisdom in those words struck Walter with unexpected force. Throughout his business career, he had operated on the principle that success meant independence, that power came from needing no one. Yet here was this child, living in poverty by his standards, who understood something he had missed. Your mum sounds smart, Walter said. Lily nodded seriously. She's the smartest person I know, and the strongest. She works really hard. Walter closed his eyes as Lily continued to tend to his wounds. The pain in his body was significant, but it paled compared to the ache in his heart when he thought of what had transpired in that warehouse. His own children, his own brother, they had orchestrated this. The hands that had struck him belonged to hired thugs, but the true betrayal came from his family. The sound of a key in the lock made Walter tense. The door opened and a woman entered, her shoulders slumped with exhaustion. She wore a plain navy uniform dress, her dark hair pulled back in a practical ponytail, her hands reddened from cleaning chemicals. Lily, I'm home early because Mrs. Whitfield had a... Sarah Sullivan froze when she saw the stranger on her sofa, her daughter tending to his injuries. Her eyes widened with alarm and she rushed to pull Lily away. Who are you? What are you doing in our home? Mom, it's okay, Lily protested. This is Mr. Harrington. I found him hurt by the creek. He needed help. Sarah's expression shifted from fear to concern as she took in Walter's injuries. What happened to you? Should I call an ambulance? Walter shook his head weakly. No hospitals, no police, please. Sarah's eyes narrowed with suspicion. Are you in some kind of trouble? Not the kind you're thinking, Walter replied. I was attacked, but going to authorities would only make things worse right now. Sarah hesitated, her protective instincts warring with compassion. She looked at her daughter, who gazed back with pleading eyes. Mom, we have to help him. Remember what you always tell me about doing the right thing. Sarah sighed, recognizing her own teachings coming back to her. Let me see those injuries. As Sarah examined Walter more thoroughly, her practiced hands gentle but efficient, she made her decision. You can stay tonight. Tomorrow, when you're stronger, we'll figure out next steps. Walter nodded gratefully. Thank you, both of you. After Sarah had cleaned and bandaged his wounds, using their limited first aid supplies with skill born of necessity, she helped Walter to a more comfortable position on the sofa. I'm making soup, she told him firmly. You need to eat something. As Sarah moved to the small kitchen, Walter watched Lily set the table with mismatched dishes, taking care with each placement. There was pride in her movements, dignity in her careful arrangement of their humble tableware. In the soft light of the apartment, surrounded by the gentle domestic sounds of a mother and daughter preparing a simple meal, Walter felt something shift inside him. For the first time in decades, he was in a space where his wealth meant nothing, where his name carried no weight. He was simply a human being cared for by other human beings. The revelation was both humbling and strangely liberating. Walter woke to the sound of cartoons playing softly on the television and the scent of coffee brewing. For a moment, disoriented by pain and unfamiliar surroundings, he struggled to place himself. Then the events of the previous day crashed over him. The warehouse, the betrayal, the creek, and the little girl who had found him. He tried to sit up, wincing at the sharp protest from his ribs. The movement caught Lily's attention. She sat cross-legged on the floor, a bowl of cereal balanced on her lap, watching Saturday morning cartoons with the volume turned low. "Mom," she called. "Mr. Harrington's awake." Sarah appeared from the bedroom, already dressed in jeans and a faded sweater, her hair damp from a shower. She carried a mug of coffee, which she offered to Walter. "How are you feeling?" she asked, her voice gentler than it had been the night before, though a wariness remained in her eyes. "Like I've been hit by a truck," Walter admitted, accepting the coffee gratefully. "But better than I should be, thanks to you and Lily." Sarah perched on the arm of a threadbare armchair. "Mr. Harrington, I need to understand what happened to you. Lily says she found you by the creek, badly beaten. Who did this?" Walter's hands tightened around the mug. How could he explain that his own flesh and blood had orchestrated this? The shame of it burned nearly as much as his physical injuries. "It's complicated," he said finally. "Let's just say I trusted people I shouldn't have." "Were you robbed?" Sarah pressed. "Your clothes are expensive, but we didn't find a wallet or phone." Walter nodded. "Yes, they took everything." It wasn't exactly a lie. His brother and children had indeed taken everything from him, including his sense of security and trust. Sarah studied him, clearly sensing there was more to the story. "Do you have someone we can call? Family? Friends?" The question hung painfully in the air. Walter had business associates, employees, lawyers, but friends. He'd been so consumed with building his empire that relationships had become transactional. As for family, they were the very people who had orchestrated his downfall. "There's no one," he admitted. The words tasted bitter. Sarah's expression softened slightly. "Well, you need a few days to recover at least. 2 days to... You can stay here until you're stronger." "I can't impose..." "It's not imposing if it's offered," Sarah cut him off. "Besides, Lily's already decided you're staying." She nodded toward the girl, who was watching them intently, cartoons forgotten. Walter found himself smiling despite everything. "Thank you." Later that morning, after Sarah had changed his bandages with gentle efficiency, she announced she needed to go grocery shopping. "Lily, homework before more TV, okay? I'll be back in an hour." After Sarah left, Lily retrieved her backpack and pulled out a math workbook, settling at the small kitchen table. Walter watched her work, her small face scrunched in concentration, pencil gripped tightly in her hand. "Need any help?" he offered, after seeing her erase the same problem for the 3rd time. Lily looked up, hesitant but hopeful. "Do you know fractions?" Walter nodded. "I do, may I?" He gestured to the empty chair beside her. For the next 45 minutes, Walter patiently explained fractions, using examples from cooking and sharing that made the abstract concepts concrete. Lily was quick to understand, her eyes lighting up with each breakthrough. "You're really good at teaching," she told him earnestly. "Way better than Miss Wallace. She gets all flustered when we don't understand." Walter felt an unexpected warmth spread through his chest. When was the last time anyone had given him a genuine compliment, not tied to his wealth or power? "I've never actually taught anyone before," he admitted. Lily looked surprised. "Really, don't you have kids?" The innocent question landed like a blow. "I do," Walter said quietly. "3 of them, all grown up now." "Do they live far away?" Lily asked. "Yes," Walter replied, unable to elaborate. "Very far." Lily seemed to sense his discomfort and changed the subject. "Want to see my science project? I'm making a model of the solar system." When Sarah returned with groceries, she found them surrounded by papier-mâché planets in various stages of completion. Walter was carefully helping Lily paint Neptune a deep blue, his expensive trousers speckled with paint, despite the newspaper spread beneath their work. Sarah paused in the doorway, grocery bags in hand, struck by the scene. There was something incongruous yet touching about the white-haired man in torn designer clothes, hunched over a craft project with her daughter, both entirely absorbed in their task. "Mom!" Lily exclaimed. "Mr. Harrington knows all about space. Did you know Neptune has 14 moons?" "I didn't," Sarah replied, setting down the groceries. "Looks like you two have been busy." Over the next 3 days, Walter's physical strength gradually returned, though dark bruises still mottled his skin and his ribs ached with every deep breath. But something else was happening too, something unexpected. The cramped apartment, which should have felt like a prison to a man accustomed to luxury, instead became a sanctuary. Meals were simple, but shared with conversation and laughter. Lily insisted on showing Walter her entire rock collection, her favorite books, her secret hiding spots in the apartment. She treated him not as Walter Harrington, CEO and billionaire, but simply as Mr. Walter, an adult who listened when she spoke and answered her endless questions with patience. Sarah remained more reserved, though her initial suspicion had largely given way to a cautious acceptance. She was a woman who had learned the hard way not to trust too easily, yet there was something about Walter that didn't fit her image of a wealthy man in trouble. He never complained about their modest accommodations or simple meals. Instead, he seemed almost fascinated by their daily routines, the small rituals that structured their lives. On the 4th morning, Walter woke before dawn and found Sarah in the kitchen, preparing for her day. She startled slightly at his appearance. "I didn't mean to frighten you," he apologized. "I heard you moving around." Sarah shook her head. "It's fine. I'm just making lunch for Lily before I head to work." She was assembling a sandwich with mathematical precision, cutting the crusts off with practiced movements. "May I make coffee?" Walter offered. Sarah nodded, and they worked in companionable silence for a few minutes. "You're very good with her," Sarah said finally. "With Lily. Not many adults really listen to children the way you do." Walter considered this as he measured coffee grounds. "She makes it easy. She's remarkable. Curious, kind, resilient. You've done an incredible job raising her." Sarah's hands stilled momentarily. "It hasn't been easy. Her father left when she was 4. No child support, no visits, nothing, just disappeared." She closed the lunchbox with a decisive snap. "But we manage." "More than manage," Walter said quietly. "You've created a real home here." Sarah looked around the tiny kitchen with its chipped countertops and outdated appliances, then back at Walter with a raised eyebrow. "It's not much compared to where you come from. And how would you know where I come from?" Walter asked, genuinely curious. Sarah gave him a knowing look. "Your clothes, even torn up, cost more than my monthly rent. The way you speak, your mannerisms. You're obviously educated, wealthy. This," she gestured around them, "must seem like poverty to you." Walter considered his response carefully. "I've learned more in 4 days here than in years of board meetings and charity galas. There's a difference between a house and a home, Sarah. I had the former, not the latter." Something in his tone made Sarah study him more carefully. "Who are you running from, Walter? Really?" The directness of her question caught him off guard. Before he could formulate a response, Lily appeared in the doorway, rubbing sleep from her eyes, hair tousled. "Morning," she mumbled, making a beeline for her mother's embrace. Sarah hugged her daughter tightly, then smoothed her hair. "Breakfast, then get dressed for school. I've got to leave early today. Mrs. Whitfield wants the windows done." "I can walk Lily to school," Walter offered spontaneously, "if that would help." Sarah hesitated, maternal protectiveness warring with practicality. "Please, Mum," Lily piped up. "Mr. Walter tells the best stories on walks." Sarah's expression softened. "All right, but straight to school, young lady, and listen to Mr. Walter." After Sarah left for work, Walter helped Lily with her morning routine. He was clumsy at first, unused to helping a child prepare for school, but Lily guided him with patient instructions. "You have to check that I brushed my teeth," she informed him seriously, "and make sure I have my homework in my backpack." Walking Lily to school, Walter felt strangely conspicuous in his borrowed clothes, jeans and a flannel shirt left behind by Sarah's brother during a visit. They were slightly too small, the sleeves ending above his wrists, but they were clean and whole, unlike his ruined suit. Lily chattered happily beside him, pointing out landmarks in the neighborhood: the best corner store for penny candy, the house with the meanest dog, the tree where blue jays nested in spring. Walter absorbed it all, seeing the world through her 7-year-old perspective. At the school gate, Lily surprised him with a quick hug around his waist. "See you after school, Mr. Walter." Then she was gone, swallowed by the stream of children entering the building. Walter stood for a moment, watching until she disappeared from view. The simple act of walking a child to school, something he had rarely done with his own children, always too busy with early morning meetings, had filled him with an unexpected contentment. As he turned to walk back to the apartment, Walter noticed a newspaper in a vending machine. His own face stared back at him from the business section, alongside the headline, "Harrington Foods, CEO missing, foul play suspected." The world he had left behind was looking for him. But for the first time in his life, Walter Harrington was in no hurry to be found. 2 weeks passed, and Walter's presence in the Sullivan household had evolved from unexpected guest to something resembling family. His bruises had faded from purple to yellow, and he moved with greater ease, though his ribs still protested certain movements. During this time, a routine had developed, one that Walter found himself embracing with surprising enthusiasm. Each morning, he would rise early with Sarah, prepare coffee while she made Lily's lunch, then walk Lily to school after Sarah left for work. The afternoons were spent helping Lily with homework, teaching her chess, using a battered set found at a thrift store, or accompanying her on her recycling expeditions, which he now understood were less about environmental consciousness and more about survival. In the evenings, Walter insisted on cooking dinner, a skill he had never developed in his previous life but approached now with the same determination that had built his business empire. His first attempts were disastrous: burned grilled cheese sandwiches, pasta boiled to mush. But Sarah and Lily ate every bite without complaint. Gradually, with coaching from cooking shows on their small television and patient guidance from Sarah, Walter's culinary skills improved. On this particular evening, Walter was chopping vegetables for a stir-fry when Sarah returned from work earlier than expected. Her face was drawn, her shoulders slumped in a way that signaled more than physical exhaustion. "Mom," Lily called from where she was setting the table, "Mr. Walter is making dinner with the wok Mrs. Chen downstairs lent us." Sarah managed a smile for her daughter, but Walter could see it didn't reach her eyes. "Everything okay?" he asked quietly when Lily went to wash her hands. Sarah shook her head, waiting until Lily was out of earshot before responding. "I was let go today, without notice." Walter frowned. "From the Whitfield house, why?" "Mrs. Whitfield claimed some jewelry was missing, a pearl necklace." Sarah's voice was tight with controlled anger. "She implied, no, she outright accused me of taking it." "That's absurd," Walter said immediately. In the short time he had known Sarah Sullivan, he had witnessed her unfailing integrity, even in the smallest matters. "Of course it is," Sarah agreed, her voice low and fierce. "I've never taken anything that wasn't mine in my life, but it doesn't matter. She refused to pay me for the past 2 weeks' work and told me not to come back." Walter felt a surge of indignation on her behalf. "That's illegal. She can't withhold wages you've already earned." Sarah gave a bitter laugh. "Sure she can. What am I going to do? Hire a lawyer? People like Mrs. Whitfield know people like me can't fight back." The phrase "people like Mrs. Whitfield" struck Walter uncomfortably. Until recently, he had been people like Mrs. Whitfield, insulated by wealth, accustomed to power, disconnected from the struggles of those who served his comfortable lifestyle. "How much did she owe you?" Walter asked. Almost $600, Sarah replied, rubbing her temples. Which means I'm short for rent next week unless I can pick up extra houses immediately. Walter's mind raced. He had no access to his considerable fortune without revealing his identity, something he wasn't prepared to do. But this situation demanded action. I have an idea, he said. Let me handle this. Sarah looked skeptical. Walter, I appreciate the thought, but trust me, he interrupted gently. I may not have access to my resources right now, but I still have certain skills. The next morning, after walking Lily to school, Walter took a bus to Medina, one of Seattle's most exclusive neighborhoods. The trip across Lake Washington via the 520 floating bridge gave him time to refine his approach. He had learned from Sarah that Elizabeth Whitfield was a prominent socialite whose husband ran a successful investment firm. Their lakefront mansion was a showcase often featured in local lifestyle magazines. Walter's appearance had changed significantly in the weeks since his disappearance. His normally clean-shaven face now sported a short beard streaked with gray, and Sarah had trimmed his hair in a different style. Combined with his borrowed clothes, worn jeans, a flannel shirt, and a weathered jacket, he looked nothing like the polished CEO whose face had appeared in business publications. The Whitfield estate was impressive, a modern glass and cedar structure with expansive lake views, surrounded by meticulously landscaped gardens. Walter approached the front gate with confidence, pressing the intercom button. Whitfield residence, answered a clipped voice. Good morning, Walter replied smoothly. I'm Thomas Reynolds from Mercer Island Insurance. I'm here about Mrs. Whitfield's claim regarding the missing pearl necklace. There was a moment of silence. We haven't filed an insurance claim. Exactly, Walter countered. That's why I'm here. Our fraud prevention department noticed a police report about the item, but no corresponding claim. We're following up as part of our premium client service. Another pause, then the gate buzzed open. Walter walked up the curving driveway, admiring the property with the eye of someone who owned similar real estate. At the door, a housekeeper, presumably Sarah's replacement, led him to a sunlit sitting room overlooking Lake Washington. Elizabeth Whitfield entered a few minutes later, a slim woman in her 50s with highlighted blonde hair and the taut skin of someone well acquainted with cosmetic procedures. She extended a manicured hand. Mr. Reynolds, is it? I'm rather busy this morning, so I hope this won't take long. Walter shook her hand, noting the numerous rings, including a diamond that would fund Sarah and Lily's expenses for years. I'll be brief, Mrs. Whitfield. I understand you reported a pearl necklace stolen. Could you describe the item? Elizabeth seated herself on a white sofa, gesturing for Walter to take a chair opposite. It was a single strand of South Sea pearls with a diamond clasp, a gift from my husband for our 20th anniversary. Quite valuable. Walter nodded sympathetically. And you believe your former housekeeper took it? Who else? Elizabeth's perfectly shaped eyebrows rose. The necklace was in my jewelry case, and then it wasn't. She was the only one with access to my bedroom that day. I see. And when exactly did you notice it missing? Last Tuesday after she left. Walter made a show of consulting a non-existent file. Mrs. Whitfield, did you happen to wear the necklace recently, perhaps to the Children's Hospital benefit at the Four Seasons last month? Elizabeth frowned slightly. Yes, I believe I did. How would you know that? We maintain detailed records of insured items being worn at public events. Walter improvised smoothly. Did you by any chance check your evening purse? The one you carried that night? Sometimes clasps fail and items slip into linings. A flicker of uncertainty crossed Elizabeth's face. I don't think... If you wouldn't mind checking, Walter pressed gently. It would help us complete our report. Reluctantly, Elizabeth left the room. Walter waited, glancing around at the tasteful furnishings that spoke of wealth and privilege. The art on the walls, primarily bland landscapes, suggested money without true aesthetic discernment. Elizabeth returned 10 minutes later, her expression a mixture of embarrassment and relief. In her hand lay the pearl necklace. It was in the purse, she admitted. The clasp must have come undone during the evening. Walter nodded as if this was a common occurrence. I'm glad we could resolve this misunderstanding. Now, regarding your former employee, Sarah Sullivan, since the necklace has been found, I assume you'll be contacting her to apologize and settle her outstanding wages. Elizabeth's expression hardened. That's hardly necessary. She was let go for multiple reasons. Mrs. Whitfield, Walter's voice took on a steely quality, that had once made corporate rivals tremble. False accusations of theft are serious matters. Insurance fraud is even more serious. While I'm pleased we've resolved the issue of the necklace, I would hate to have to file a report indicating potential insurance fraud. That's ridiculous. I made an honest mistake. Of course, Walter interrupted smoothly. And honest mistakes are best corrected promptly and completely. I believe Ms. Sullivan is owed approximately $600 in unpaid wages, plus perhaps a small additional sum for the inconvenience and damage to her professional reputation. Elizabeth stared at him, sensing something beneath his mild manner that she couldn't quite place. Finally, she rose and left the room without a word. When she returned, she held an envelope. $800, she said stiffly. I've added a note acknowledging the misunderstanding about the necklace. Will that suffice? Walter accepted the envelope, checking its contents before nodding. This will certainly help resolve the matter. Thank you for your cooperation, Mrs. Whitfield. As Walter was shown out, he felt a complex mixture of emotions. Using his business acumen to help Sarah gave him satisfaction, yet he was uncomfortably aware that he had once moved in the same privileged circles as Elizabeth Whitfield. How many Sarah Sullivans had worked in his homes over the years? How many had he truly seen as people rather than as functions? That evening, when Walter handed Sarah the envelope, her eyes widened in disbelief. How did you... she began. Let's just say I appealed to Mrs. Whitfield's better nature, Walter replied with a small smile. Sarah counted the money, then looked up at him with glistening eyes. This is $200 more than she owed me. Consider it interest, Walter said. And there's a note clearing your name. Sarah's fingers trembled slightly as she read the note. I don't know how to thank you. You already have, Walter replied. You and Lily took in a stranger when he needed help. You've given me a place to heal, and not just physically. Later that night, after Lily was asleep, Sarah and Walter sat at the small kitchen table, sharing a pot of tea. Sarah studied him over the rim of her mug. You know, for someone who claims to be down on his luck, you have remarkable skills, she observed. The way you handled the Whitfield situation suggests someone used to wielding influence. Walter met her gaze steadily. In my former life, I had some experience in negotiations. Your former life, Sarah repeated. You talk about it like you've been reborn. The observation was more accurate than she knew. Walter considered how much to reveal. These weeks in Sarah and Lily's home had begun to heal something in him that had been broken long before his physical assault, a disconnection from simple human warmth, from genuine connection. In many ways I have been, he said, finally. Sarah, there's something I need to tell you, about who I am and why I was attacked that day. Sarah set down her mug, giving him her full attention. I'm listening. Outside, rain began to fall, pattering against the windows of the small apartment. Inside, Walter Harrington began to tell his story to the woman who, along with her daughter, had inadvertently shown him what truly mattered in life. Sarah listened without interruption as Walter revealed his true identity. Billionaire CEO Walter Harrington, presumed missing after what the press was calling a mysterious disappearance. He told her everything. His brother Russell's lifelong resentment, his children's growing dissatisfaction, the warehouse trap and the brutal assault that had been meant to end his life. When he finished, Sarah sat silent for a long moment, absorbing the magnitude of his revelation. So the people in those business news reports, the ones searching for you, claiming to be heartbroken, those are the same people who tried to... She couldn't bring herself to finish the sentence. Walter nodded grimly. My family has always excelled at public performance. Right now they're playing the roles of concerned relatives, while privately celebrating what they believe was a successful elimination. And you've been hiding here, in our tiny apartment, Sarah said slowly. When you could be in a penthouse suite somewhere, with private security and the best medical care. If I accessed any of my accounts or properties, they would know immediately, Walter explained, and they would finish what they started. No, your home has been the perfect sanctuary, the last place anyone would think to look for Walter Harrington. Sarah ran a hand through her hair, a gesture Walter had come to recognize as a sign of her processing difficult information. What are you going to do now? You can't hide forever. The question had occupied Walter's thoughts increasingly as his strength returned. I'm working on a plan. There are certain people I trust, my head of security for one, and my personal attorney. but I need to contact them carefully. And what happens to those who hurt you, your own family? Sarah's voice held a note of disbelief that such betrayal could exist. Walter's expression hardened. Justice will come, but on my terms, not theirs. Sarah looked as though she wanted to ask more questions, but a small sound from the hallway drew their attention. Lily stood in the doorway in her pajamas, clutching her stuffed rabbit. I had a bad dream, she said in a small voice. Sarah immediately opened her arms, and Lily rushed into them. What was it about, sweetheart? There was a monster chasing Mr. Walter, Lily murmured into her mother's shoulder. I couldn't help him. Walter felt his throat tighten at the child's concern for him. He moved to kneel beside Sarah's chair, bringing himself to Lily's eye level. It was just a dream, he assured her gently. I'm right here, and I'm safe because of you and your mum. Lily reached out one small hand to touch his face, as if confirming he was real. Promise you won't go away? The innocent question struck Walter to his core. In the weeks he had spent with Sarah and Lily, he had come to care for them in ways he hadn't anticipated. The thought of leaving them filled him with a peculiar emptiness. I promise I'll always be your friend, he said carefully, even if I can't stay here forever. Sarah met his eyes over her daughter's head, a silent understanding passing between them. Whatever came next, their lives were now intertwined in ways none of them could have predicted. The next morning, Walter made his move. Using a prepaid phone purchased with cash, he called Thomas Reynolds, his head of security, arranging to meet at a small cafe in a neighborhood far from both the Sullivan apartment and his former corporate haunts. Thomas was already waiting when Walter arrived, disguised with a baseball cap and sunglasses. The security chief's normally impassive face showed rare emotion when he recognized his employer, despite the beard and different clothing style. Sir, Thomas said quietly, as Walter slid into the booth opposite him, I've been looking everywhere for you. I know, Walter replied, and I appreciate your discretion. Have you told anyone about this meeting? Thomas shook his head. Not a soul. But sir, the situation is complicated. Your brother has assumed temporary leadership of the company. Your children are making public appeals for information. The police investigation is ongoing. Walter wasn't surprised. And my assets? Frozen pending the investigation, though your brother is pushing to have you declared legally deceased to expedite transfer of control. After only a month, that's ambitious even for Russell. Thomas leaned forward. Sir, what happened? Where have you been? Walter gave him an edited version of events, omitting Sarah and Lily's involvement entirely. I need your help, Thomas. Discreetly. There are people I need to protect before I make my return public. Over the next hour, they formulated a plan. Walter provided specific instructions regarding transfers of funds, property acquisitions, and legal documents, all to be handled through channels that couldn't be traced back to him. Thomas would work with Walter's personal attorney, Richard Keller, one of the few people Walter trusted implicitly. This needs to happen quickly, Walter emphasized. I have reason to believe they may be closing in. Thomas's expression grew concerned. Have there been threats? Not yet, Walter admitted, but it's only a matter of time. What Walter didn't tell Thomas was his growing concern about unusual vehicles in Sarah's neighborhood, black SUVs with tinted windows that seemed out of place among the modest cars of the working-class residents. Twice in the past week, he had noticed men in suits watching the elementary school during pickup time. It might be paranoia, but Walter hadn't built a business empire by ignoring his instincts. 3 days after his meeting with Thomas, Walter's fears proved justified. He was helping Lily with a science project at the kitchen table when Sarah burst through the door, her face pale with alarm. Someone was asking about you, she said without preamble. At the Peterson house where I was cleaning today. A man in an expensive suit showing your picture. Not the one from the news, a different one, more recent. Walter felt his blood run cold. What did he say? He claimed to be a private investigator hired by your family. Said they had reason to believe you were staying with someone in this neighborhood. Sarah's hands trembled slightly as she set down her purse. I pretended I'd never seen you before, but I don't think he believed me. Walter crossed to the window, carefully peering out through the blinds. The street looked normal, but his sense of security had been shattered. We need to be careful, he said, turning back to Sarah. All of us. That evening, after Lily was asleep, Walter and Sarah sat at the kitchen table, speaking in low voices. I've put measures in place, Walter explained. By the end of the week, I'll have access to resources that will allow me to protect you and Lily properly. We don't need protection, Sarah insisted. Once you're gone, they'll have no reason to bother us. Walter shook his head. They're thorough, Sarah. If they suspect you helped me, they'll want to know what I told you, what you know about them. They won't just walk away. Sarah's expression hardened with determination. I won't let anyone threaten my daughter. Neither will I, Walter promised, which is why I've arranged for you and Lily to move as soon as possible. Somewhere safer, somewhere better. Sarah's eyes widened. Move! Walter, this is our home, Lily's school, our neighbors. I know, Walter said gently, and I wouldn't suggest it if I didn't believe it was necessary. But this apartment isn't safe anymore, and you deserve better than constantly looking over your shoulder. Before Sarah could respond, a sharp knock at the door silenced them both. It was nearly 11 at night, far too late for casual visitors. Walter gestured for Sarah to stay seated while he approached the door cautiously. Who is it? He called, pitching his voice differently than usual. Package delivery, came the response. Need a signature? Walter frowned. No legitimate delivery service operated this late. He peered through the peephole and felt his heart skip a beat. The man in the hallway was no delivery person. Even in casual clothes, Walter recognized his son Michael's athletic build and characteristic stance. Sarah, Walter whispered urgently, take Lily and go out the fire escape, now. Sarah didn't waste time asking questions. The seriousness in Walter's voice was enough. She moved silently to Lily's room while Walter continued to speak through the door. Leave it outside, he called. I'll get it in the morning. Can't do that, Michael replied. Need signature tonight. Company policy. Walter watched through the peephole as Michael shifted position, revealing his hand moving toward his jacket pocket. The gesture sent a chill through Walter. Was his own son armed? Sarah emerged with a sleepy Lily wrapped in a blanket. Walter motioned them toward the window that led to the fire escape, his finger to his lips indicating silence. The knocking came again, harder this time. Sir, I know you're in there. This will only take a minute of your time. As Sarah helped Lily through the window, Walter grabbed his jacket and the emergency bag he had prepared days ago, containing cash, a prepaid phone, and basic supplies. He followed them onto the fire escape, closing the window behind him just as he heard the apartment door being forced open. The metal stairs of the fire escape were slick with rain, making their descent treacherous. Lily, now fully awake and sensing the danger, remained admirably silent, her eyes wide with fear as she clung to her mother. They reached the alley behind the building and Walter led them quickly away from the streetlights, staying in the shadows. My car is 3 blocks from here, Sarah whispered. I parked it after work. They moved as quickly as they dared, Walter constantly scanning for followers. The night was their ally, the rain keeping most people indoors. When they reached Sarah's aging Honda Civic, Walter helped Lily into the back seat, while Sarah slid behind the wheel. Where do we go? Sarah asked, her voice remarkably steady given the circumstances. Head north, Walter directed. I know a place we can stay tonight. Tomorrow everything changes. As they drove through the rainy Seattle night, Walter looked back at the apartment building that had become more of a home to him than his mansion ever was. In the third-floor window of apartment 2C, a silhouette was visible. A man looking down at the street, searching. Michael had found him, which meant the others wouldn't be far behind. In the back seat, Lily had fallen asleep again, exhaustion overcoming fear. Walter watched her peaceful face in the glow of passing streetlights, a fierce protective instinct rising within him. He had failed to protect himself from his biological family's betrayal, but he would not fail Sarah and Lily. Whatever it took, he would keep them safe. They had saved him in ways that went far beyond pulling him from that creek. Now it was his turn to save them. As Sarah navigated the rain-slick streets, following Walter's quiet directions, neither of them spoke of what lay ahead. The future had suddenly become as uncertain as the foggy road before them, illuminated only a few yards ahead by the car's headlights. But of one thing Walter was certain: the life he had known was over. And perhaps that wasn't entirely a tragedy. The small lakeside cabin in Snohomish County had belonged to Walter's former groundskeeper, who had left it to Walter in his will 5 years ago. Walter had kept the property off the books, maintaining it through a shell company for occasional fishing retreats, one of the few simple pleasures he had allowed himself over the years. Now it served as the perfect temporary hideout. Dawn was breaking over the misty lake as Sarah stood on the cabin's small deck, clutching a mug of coffee. Inside, Lily still slept, exhausted from their nighttime flight. "How long have you owned this place?" Sarah asked when Walter joined her, offering a second mug of coffee. "About 5 years," he replied, "but I've visited maybe 3 times, always too busy with the company." Sarah nodded, her eyes on the glassy surface of the lake. "What happens now, Walter?" Before he could answer, his prepaid phone buzzed with a text. It was from Thomas. "Documents ready, transfer complete, safe house prepared as requested." Walter felt a surge of relief. "Now we make sure you and Lily are safe, permanently." He showed her the papers Thomas had prepared and delivered electronically, the deed to a modest but comfortable house in a safe Seattle suburb, with excellent schools, legal documents establishing a trust fund for Lily's education, a monthly stipend for Sarah that would ensure she never had to clean another house unless she chose to. Sarah stared at the documents on the phone screen, her expression unreadable. "Walter, we can't accept this, it's too much." "It's not enough," Walter countered. "And it's not charity, Sarah. It's protection and gratitude. You and Lily saved my life, not just by pulling me from that creek, but by showing me what really matters." Sarah turned to face him fully. "So we didn't do anything special, Walter. We just treated you like a human being." "Exactly," Walter said softly. "Do you know how rare that is for someone in my position? To be valued for who you are, not what you own or what you can provide." Sarah's expression softened. "I still can't believe your own family would—" She trailed off, unable to complete the thought. "Neither could I," Walter admitted. "But power and money create a particular kind of poison. I see that now. I contributed to it by the way I raised them, the values I instilled, or failed to instill." Sarah was quiet for a moment, then asked, "What will you do about them? Will you go to the police?" Walter shook his head. "Not yet. First, I need to confront them myself, on my terms." Sarah looked alarmed. "That's dangerous, Walter. They've already tried to—" "I know," he interrupted gently. "But I have to look them in the eyes, at least once more. I need to understand why." Later that morning, after breakfast, Walter used the prepaid phone to make another call. This one to Richard Keller, his attorney. The plan they formulated was precise, requiring careful timing and absolute discretion. "Walter," Sarah said when he ended the call, "let me come with you." He looked at her in surprise. "Absolutely not. It's too risky." "I'm not suggesting I join the confrontation," Sarah clarified. "But let me drive you, wait nearby. If something goes wrong, it—" Walter wanted to refuse, to keep her as far from danger as possible, but there was a practical wisdom to her suggestion. And perhaps, he admitted to himself, he wasn't ready to say goodbye just yet. By afternoon, they had moved to the safe house Thomas had arranged, a modern apartment in a secure building in Bellevue, across Lake Washington from Seattle. Lily was fascinated by the view from the 20th floor, pressing her face against the windows to watch the ferries crossing the water. "We're only staying here for a day or 2, Sarah explained to her. "Then we're moving to a new house, a real house with a yard." "Is Mr. Walter coming with us?" Lily asked, her innocent question hanging in the air. Sarah and Walter exchanged glances. "Mr. Walter has some important business to take care of," Sarah said carefully. "But he'll always be our friend." Lily considered this, then nodded. "Can I pick my room color in the new house?" "Absolutely," Sarah promised, relieved at the easy acceptance only a child could offer. That evening, after Lily was asleep in one of the apartment's bedrooms, Walter and Sarah reviewed the plan for the following day. "The company board meeting is at 10, Walter explained. "Russell, James, Diane, and Michael will all be there, along with the other board members. Thomas has arranged for me to enter through the private executive elevator." "And you're sure they won't have security?" Sarah couldn't bring herself to say weapons or guns. "The building has metal detectors," Walter assured her, "and Thomas will be there as backup." Sarah looked unconvinced. "I still don't understand why you need to confront them in person. Why not just go to the authorities with what you know?" Walter sighed. "It's complicated, Sarah. The evidence against them is circumstantial at best. My word against theirs, and a lengthy legal battle would drain resources better used elsewhere." "So what's your goal tomorrow?" "Justice," Walter said simply. "But on my terms, not the legal system's. And closure. For me." Sarah studied his face, seeing the resolution there. "Just promise me you'll be careful." "I promise," he said, taking her hand. "Sarah, whatever happens tomorrow, I want you to know these weeks with you and Lily have changed me. You've given me a gift I can never repay." Sarah's eyes glistened. "We could say the same about you." The next morning dawned clear and bright, a rarity for Seattle in early spring. Walter dressed in a suit Thomas had delivered, not his usual bespoke Italian, but a quality off-the-rack suit that fit well enough. The man in the mirror looked both familiar and strange to him. Walter Harrington, CEO, but with new lines of experience etched into his face, new wisdom in his eyes. Sarah drove him to the Harrington Foods headquarters in downtown Seattle, parking a block away as planned. "I'll wait here," she said. "If I don't hear from you in 2 hours, I call Thomas." Walter nodded. Before exiting the car, he hesitated, then leaned over and kissed her cheek. "Thank you for everything." The walk to his former corporate headquarters felt surreal. People hurried past him on the sidewalk, none recognizing the supposedly missing billionaire in their midst. Walter entered through a service entrance where Thomas was waiting to escort him to the executive elevator. "Everyone's in the boardroom," Thomas confirmed. "They think they're meeting to discuss formally appointing Russell as CEO." Walter smiled grimly. "They're in for a surprise." The executive floor was quiet. Most of the staff in the boardroom with the executives. Walter paused outside the familiar double doors, hearing his brother's voice through the wood. "Unfortunate circumstances, but we must move forward," Russell was saying. "The company needs stable leadership." Walter pushed open the doors. The room fell instantly silent, a tableau of shocked faces frozen in disbelief. Russell stood at the head of the table, Walter's place, while James, Michael, and Diane sat along one side. The other board members, mostly long-time company executives, stared open-mouthed. "I believe that's my chair, Russell," Walter said calmly. "Dad?" Diane whispered, her face draining of color. James recovered first. "This is impossible. You're alive?" Walter finished for him. "Despite your best efforts, all of you." Russell had gone rigid, his knuckles white where they gripped the edge of the table. "Walter, you're confused. We've been searching for you for weeks. There was an accident." "There was no accident," Walter cut him off sharply. "There was a carefully planned assault in a warehouse with hired thugs. Ring any bells?" The other board members looked between Walter and his family in growing confusion and alarm. "Walter," one of them, Helen Jacobs, spoke up. "What are you saying?" Walter never took his eyes off his family as he replied. "I'm saying that my brother and my children arranged to have me eliminated so they could take control of the company and my assets." Chaos erupted as board members began talking over each other. Michael had gone pale, while James maintained a mask of outrage that didn't reach his eyes. Diane looked like she might be ill. "That's absurd," Russell declared loudly. "Walter is clearly unwell. The stress of whatever happened to him." "Save it, Russell," Walter interrupted. "Thomas?" His security chief stepped forward, distributing folders to each board member. "Financial records," he explained, "showing payments from Russell Harrington to known criminal associates, phone records documenting calls between all 4 family members and these same individuals in the days leading up to Walter's disappearance, and sworn statements from 2 of the men hired to conduct the assault, who have agreed to testify in exchange for reduced sentences." The room fell silent again as the board members leafed through the evidence. James looked stunned, staring at his father with a mixture of disbelief and dawning horror. "You weren't supposed to survive," he said quietly, the first admission of guilt. "Clearly," Walter replied, "yet here I am." "How did you—" Michael began. "I was found by someone with more humanity than my entire family combined," Walter said. "Her child who showed more moral courage than any of you ever have." Russell had begun to sweat visibly. "Walter, we can discuss this privately. As a family." "We're not a family," Walter replied coldly. "Not anymore." He turned to address the board. "Ladies and gentlemen, I've called this meeting not just to expose what happened, but to inform you of changes effective immediately. I am stepping down as CEO of Harrington Foods." Murmurs of surprise rippled through the room. "In my absence," Walter continued, "the company will be led by Helen Jacobs, whose integrity and business acumen make her the ideal choice. The legal department has all the necessary paperwork." Helen looked stunned. "Walter, I don't understand." I'm divesting my controlling interest, Walter explained. 51% of my shares will be transferred to a worker-owned trust benefiting our employees. The remainder will fund the Harrington Foundation, focusing on child welfare and education initiatives. The board erupted again, but Walter raised his hand for silence. As for my family, he said, his voice hardening, they will receive exactly what they deserve. Effective immediately, their employment with Harrington Foods is terminated. Their company shares are frozen pending criminal investigation. Their access to family trusts and properties is revoked. Russell lunged forward. You can't do this. The family agreements were invalidated the moment you tried to eliminate me. Walter finished coldly. My attorneys have ensured everything is legally binding. It's over, Russell. Walter turned to his children, seeing not the adults before him, but the babies he had once held, the toddlers who had run to him with scraped knees, the teenagers who had gradually grown distant as he prioritized business over family. I failed you, he said quietly. As a father, I taught you that wealth and power were more important than character and compassion. That's my burden to bear. But your choices are your own. James stood, his face flushed with anger. You sanctimonious— Enough, Walter cut him off. Security is waiting outside to escort all four of you from the building. The police have been notified and will want statements. I suggest you find good attorneys. As if on cue, the boardroom doors opened, and several security officers entered. The board members watched in stunned silence as Russell, James, Michael, and Diane were escorted out. Russell still protesting loudly, Diane in tears, Michael in shocked silence, and James seething with visible rage. When they were gone, Walter addressed the remaining board members. I apologize for the dramatic nature of this meeting. I'll be available later today to answer any questions about the transition. For now, Helen is in charge. Walter left the boardroom to scattered applause from some board members and shell-shocked silence from others. In the executive elevator, alone with Thomas for a moment, he leaned heavily against the wall. Are you all right, sir? Thomas asked. Walter nodded slowly. I've never been better, Thomas, or more certain of a decision. Outside, Sarah was waiting anxiously in her car, her face flooded with relief when she saw Walter walking toward her, whole and unharmed. It's done, he said simply as he slid into the passenger seat. Sarah studied his face. And how do you feel? Walter considered the question seriously. Lighter, he said finally, like I've set down something I've been carrying for too long. As they drove back to the safe house where Lily waited, Walter gazed out at the Seattle skyline, the city he had conquered, the empire he had built and now willingly walked away from. What will you do now? Sarah asked softly. Walter turned to her, a smile softening his features. Live, Sarah, finally. Truly live. 5 years later, the small classroom in rural Vermont was filled with the afternoon sun as Walter Harrington, now known to everyone in town as Walter Sullivan, finished explaining a complex algebra problem to his 8th grade students. At 67, he had found an unexpected calling as a math teacher in the small community of Meadow Creek, where no one connected the quiet, bearded man with the billionaire businessman whose disappearance from Seattle corporate life had made headlines years earlier. Remember, your projects are due Monday, Walter reminded the students as they packed up their belongings. And yes, Charlie, showing your work is mandatory, not optional. A lanky boy with a mop of dark hair groaned dramatically, drawing laughs from his classmates. Walter smiled, watching them file out of the classroom. He had never imagined finding such fulfillment in teaching, in watching young minds grasp new concepts, in being valued for his knowledge rather than his wealth or power. After tidying his desk, Walter walked the familiar route home, stopping to chat with shopkeepers along Main Street. Meadow Creek was the opposite of Seattle in every way. Small, unhurried, personal. People knew their neighbors here, stopped to talk on street corners, brought soup when someone was sick. The modest white farmhouse at the edge of town had become home over the past 4 years. Walter climbed the porch steps, pausing to water the hanging plants that Sarah maintained with loving care. Inside, the house was quiet, but for the ticking of the grandfather clock in the hallway, a housewarming gift from Thomas Reynolds, who had retired from security work to open a fishing charter business in Maine. Walter checked his watch. Sarah would be finishing her shift at the local library soon, and Lily would be at soccer practice for another hour. He had time to prepare dinner, a task he had mastered through years of practice and YouTube tutorials. The kitchen, with its worn oak table and mismatched chairs collected over time, had become his favorite room in the house. As he chopped vegetables for a stir-fry, Walter reflected on the path that had led him here. After the confrontation at Harrington Foods, the legal consequences for his family had been swift and severe. Russell and James had received the harshest sentences, 15 years each for conspiracy and attempted murder. Michael had negotiated a lighter sentence by cooperating with prosecutors. Diane, who could prove she hadn't known the full extent of the plan, received probation and community service. The scandal had rocked Seattle's business community. Harrington Foods had survived under Helen Jacobs' leadership, though with a very different corporate culture. The employee ownership model Walter had implemented had proven remarkably successful, with productivity and morale soaring once workers had a genuine stake in the company's success. As for Walter himself, he had made good on his promise to Sarah and Lily, setting them up in a comfortable home in Seattle's Ballard neighborhood. But as the months passed, their relationship had evolved in unexpected ways. Weekend visits became longer stays. Holidays were spent together. Eventually, Walter had proposed, not with an extravagant diamond, but with a simple band and a promise to always put family first. Sarah had accepted on one condition, that they start fresh somewhere new, away from Seattle's memories and the lingering shadow of the Harrington name. They had chosen Vermont almost at random. Sarah had visited once during college and remembered its beauty. Lily, then 11, had embraced the adventure with characteristic enthusiasm. The sound of the front door opening interrupted Walter's thoughts. "Something smells amazing," Sarah called, setting down her bag and library books. Walter smiled as she entered the kitchen. At 41, Sarah had the same warmth in her eyes that had first drawn him to her, though smile lines now framed her face. She had flourished in Vermont, first as a volunteer at the local library, then as its head librarian. The town valued her organizational skills and quiet intelligence, never knowing she had once cleaned houses to survive. "Just a simple stir-fry," Walter replied as she kissed him hello. "How was work?" "Good. The grant for the children's reading program came through," Sarah said, washing her hands at the sink. "How were the math geniuses today?" "Distracted by the upcoming spring dance, mostly," Walter chuckled, though Eliza Johnson had some interesting insights on polynomial functions. Their conversation flowed easily as they prepared dinner together, the comfortable rhythm of a couple who had built a life on mutual respect and genuine affection. When Lily burst through the door 45 minutes later, she brought with her the boundless energy of a 12-year-old athlete. "Dad, we are going to the state championships," she announced, dropping her soccer bag on the floor. Walter felt the familiar warmth that always accompanied Lily's use of Dad, a title she had begun using spontaneously about a year after they moved to Vermont. He had never pushed for it, never expected it, which made the gift of it all the more precious. "That's fantastic, sweetheart," he said, accepting her sweaty hug. "When's the tournament?" As Lily chatted about soccer strategies and team dynamics, Walter exchanged a glance with Sarah, both of them savoring the simple joy of family dinner conversation. This was what he had missed all those years in board meetings and corporate jets, the irreplaceable richness of everyday moments, of being truly present for the people you loved. After dinner, as Sarah helped Lily with her history homework, Walter retreated to his small home office to write his weekly letter. Though email and text had long since replaced traditional correspondence for most people, Walter maintained this ritual without fail. Each week, he wrote to the Harrington Foundation, the organization he had established with the bulk of his fortune. Operating independently from him now, the foundation focused on programs supporting children in crisis and educational initiatives for underserved communities. Walter's letters contained suggestions, observations, and personal stories from his teaching experience, offering guidance without control. The foundation had become his legacy, not the corporate empire he had once prized, but something that genuinely improved lives. Reports arrived monthly, detailing the children helped, the schools funded, the communities strengthened. Walter read each one carefully, finding more satisfaction in these accomplishments than in any quarterly earnings report from his previous life. Later that evening, after Lily had gone to bed, Walter and Sarah sat on the porch swing, watching fireflies emerge in the gathering dusk. Sarah rested her head against his shoulder, their hands intertwined. "I had a call from Richard today," Walter said quietly. referring to his former attorney who still managed certain legal matters. The last appeal was denied. The sentences stand. Sarah nodded against his shoulder. Do you ever regret not visiting them? Your children, I mean. Walter considered the question carefully, as he always did when the subject of his biological family arose. I used to think I should, for closure, if nothing else, but then I realized I had already found what I was looking for. He gestured toward the house behind them, where Lily slept peacefully. This is my family now. The one I choose, and the one that chose me. Sarah squeezed his hand. Do you ever miss it? The power, the wealth, the influence. Walter shook his head. Not for a moment. I spent decades accumulating things I thought would bring fulfillment, only to discover what truly matters was never for sale. They sat in comfortable silence as darkness settled over the Vermont countryside. In the distance, the lights of Meadow Creek twinkled like earthbound stars. Walter thought about the journey that had brought him here, from corporate titan to beaten and discarded, from rescued stranger to beloved husband and father. You know what tomorrow is? Sarah asked softly. Walter nodded. 5 years since Lily found me by the creek. It had become an anniversary they acknowledged quietly each year, the day that had changed all their lives irrevocably. She wants to plant a tree in the backyard to mark the occasion, Sarah said. A symbol of new beginnings, she says. Walter smiled. She's a remarkable young woman. You raised her well. We're raising her well, Sarah corrected gently. Together. The next afternoon, the three of them stood in the backyard, taking turns shoveling soil around the roots of a young oak sapling. Lily, taking her responsibility seriously, carefully watered the tree while Walter and Sarah watched. This tree will live for hundreds of years, Lily announced with certainty. Long after we're gone, it'll still be growing. That's how legacy works, Walter told her. The truest kind anyway. Not buildings with your name on them or money in the bank, but the living things you nurture that continue growing after you're gone. Lily considered this with the thoughtful expression that reminded Walter so much of her mother. Like how you teach kids who grow up and teach other kids, Walter smiled. Exactly like that. As they headed back inside, Walter paused to look back at the small tree, its tender leaves catching the late afternoon light. From trauma and betrayal had come this new life, not just the tree, but everything around him. The home filled with laughter, instead of echoing emptiness. The work that fed his soul instead of merely his bank account. The love freely given and received, without calculation or condition. That evening after dinner, the phone rang. It was Thomas Reynolds, calling with news that Walter had been half expecting, half dreading for months. His brother Russell, incarcerated at Washington State Penitentiary, had suffered a severe heart attack. The prognosis wasn't good. He's asking to see you, Thomas said. The warden made a special request, given the circumstances. Walter was quiet for a long moment, remembering the brother who had once been his childhood playmate before resentment and ambition had poisoned their relationship. I'll think about it, he said finally. After ending the call, Walter explained the situation to Sarah as they washed dishes together. Will you go? She asked gently. Walter dried a plate, considering. I don't know, there's nothing left to say between us. No reconciliation to be had. Sometimes closure isn't about reconciliation, Sarah observed. Sometimes it's just about ending a chapter properly, so you can fully embrace the next one. Later that night, unable to sleep, Walter sat at the kitchen table with a cup of tea. The house was quiet, his family sleeping peacefully upstairs. On the refrigerator door, held by magnets, were the ordinary treasures of family life. Lily's latest school photo, a calendar marked with soccer games and library events, a handmade Mother's Day card. Walter thought about his brother lying in a prison hospital bed and about his children scattered to their various fates. James remained incarcerated, unrepentant according to Thomas's reports. Michael had served his shorter sentence and moved to Europe afterward, severing all connections to his former life. Diane, after completing her community service, had somewhat surprisingly dedicated herself to charitable work. Though she had never attempted to contact Walter, they had been motivated by greed, yes, but also by something Walter himself had cultivated. A belief that worth came from wealth and power, that the family name was more important than the family bonds. In creating his empire, he had unknowingly laid the foundation for its violent collapse. Yet from those ruins had risen something far more valuable. Walter looked around the modest kitchen, with its worn countertops and hand-sewn curtains, and felt a contentment that had eluded him in his 10,000-square-foot mansion. Here, he was loved for himself, not his money or influence. Here, he had found purpose beyond profit margins. The next morning, over breakfast, Walter made his decision. "I'm not going to see Russell," he told Sarah as they prepared lunchboxes and checked homework. "The past is the past. My future is here." Sarah studied him for a moment, then nodded. "If you're sure." "I am," Walter replied with certainty. "Some chapters don't need a formal ending. They just need to be followed by better ones." 2 weeks later, Thomas called again. Russell had passed away, alone in the prison hospital. Walter received the news with a complex mixture of emotions: regret for what might have been, sadness for a life wasted on bitterness, and a quiet recognition that the last tie to his former life had been severed. That evening, Walter took Lily fishing at the small lake near their home. As they sat peacefully on the dock, lines cast into the still water, Lily asked about his childhood, something she did occasionally, piecing together the history of the man who had become her father. "Did you have a happy family when you were my age?" she asked, swinging her legs above the water. Walter considered how to answer truthfully, without burdening a 12-year-old with the full weight of his past. "Hearts were happy," he said finally. "But I think I was always looking for something I couldn't quite name."